This video is for the weirdos, the knife nuts, the knife enthusiasts, the collectors. If you are just a casual user of knives and your only point of being into this whole thing is seeing what knife you can get for the least amount of money that'll give you the most performance, this video probably isn't for you. It's not anti those kind of people. It's just this video is talking to the weirdos and the collectors that do strange things with the companies and the models that they follow. We're going to be doing a little talk time with, I was going to say Uncle Carter. That sounds gross. That sounds creepy. Mr. Mindset. Yeah, there. I like that. Mr. Mindset. We're going to be doing a little talk time about just some interesting things I've noticed in my own collecting with knives and kind of, I don't know. I've always had a little bit of conflict between wanting to have a big, varied collection with some cool pieces that represent a lot of different makers and models, but then conversely wanting to hyper focus on specific makers and collect a bunch of different variants of that knife. Now, if I was an extremely wealthy Iranian oil tycoon, it wouldn't matter because I could just have them all. But I can't. I've got to somewhat curate what I do and don't have and what I focus on. And so I'm in a constant collection battle on what I'm trying to do. But aside from that, within that framework of weird collecting behaviors, there's a few things that I've noticed that's kind of interesting. So I've got 4 knives here that kind of represent probably my 4 favorite knives in my collection right now. But if you were to look at my collection, you might think that, oh, well, I'm sure he's got a bunch of Demkos, a bunch of Striders, a bunch of Hinderers, and a bunch of CRKs. That's not necessarily the case. Some of these I collect way more than others, and some of these I only have like one example of them. So I'm going to run through these loose concepts in my brain. I would like you guys to interact with that by providing your own feedback down below, kind of mentioning if you experience anything similar to that. And we're just going to hang out and have a good time. I'm going to show off these knives. I'm going to say what they are in case you're wondering. If you don't know, oh man, that's not a good view right there. In case you don't know what these knives are, I'm going to run through what they are and let you know. So let's do that right now. Let's get that out of the way. Let's say, what are these knives? And maybe I'll talk a little bit about what I like about them. So this is a CRK Inkosi. Plain Jane, full tie. I do have an aftermarket clip on it, but other than that, this is bone stock. I believe this one is S45 VN steel, so it's not one of the news with the Magna Cut. It's a couple of years old. I've had it for a long time. I've carried it a lot. I've sharpened it. I've used it. I absolutely love this knife. When I think of my favorite CRK knife, Chris Reeve knives, this is at the top of the list. And I've spent some time trying to see if maybe other variants I like more, Tanto, blade, inlays. Those are great. I actually have another Inkosi that's Tanto with micarta inlays. But this one, the plain Jane with the full titanium, is undoubtedly, whatever, the bee's knees. This is the bee's knees to me. Next up, we have a Demko. This is the Boss Haas Demko, full thickness, Spearpoint blade, not the most common blade. Didn't do a lot of these. Pretty sought after in terms of variants of the AD-20. This and the Harpoon are very, people like those. People clamor to those blades. The Harpoon probably a little bit more than this one, but this one is pretty close up there. It is a frickin' chonker. I believe, yeah, this one's rocking Magna Cut right there. And this also has the factory full tie handles with the diamond pattern on there, which is very, very cool. This is an absolute beast. And the cool thing about something like this, for me at least, is I love how thick and beefy and heavy and chonkery. This is not a slicer, right? This is a bruiser of a knife. And yet with the shark lock mechanism, it's so what you would think it would be. Like if you were to hand this to somebody, they would think, man, it's going to take 2 hands to close this thing. And then you just pull this little tab and it just floats ever so gently, floats shut and flies open. Pretty dang cool. Absolutely love this knife in my collection. Next up, we have a Mick Strider custom SnG right here with a really deep nightmare grind on the blade with the contrasting magma flats. I think that's magma. Really, really cool. This one is actually what they call a fatty, so it has full thickness blade of like the SMF, but it's in the SnG frame, which is the smaller of the big two models. Obviously, they have smaller models than that, but the two main ones that they have is the SnG and the SMF. And so it's kind of a cool, somewhat hybrid of it. And because it has this thicker blade, it allows for this really deep nightmare grind on here. And this one goes all the way up to the spine almost. Really like this one. It's not as flashy as some of my other Mick Strider customs, but I think maybe that's why it's my favorite one, because it's a little more subdued. I threw on this aftermarket lock bar stabilizer for a little bling of color made by Pete Gray Precision. This is one of the only aftermarket parts that are authorized to go on a Strider as of right now. So you can put these on and it won't void your warranty or anything like that. And I also really like this blacked out pocket clip with the lasered MSC on there. Very, very cool. One of my favorite customs. It's not the flashiest, but it's pretty cool. And this one here, this is kind of what sparked this whole video. Because honestly, as of right now, this is like one of my top 5 favorite knives in my collection. This is a Battlefield pickup XM-24 full thickness with the Spearpoint blade with the big swedge up top. I think it might be a DLT Trading exclusive blade shape. I could be wrong, but it's not the most common blade shape right there. Once again, big, thick chonker. This is a beast of a knife. It also has textured lock side here, which is not very common in this awesome bronze. And then it has all this battle wearing here. So this number right here, BPU number 1085, that represents that this is of the Battlefield pickup line. And then on the OD green G10 here, you also have more weathering, different textures. It's been sanded down. Very cool stuff going on here, as well as the acid washed blade. So why did this spark this video? Because I find it interesting that arguably one of the favorite, I mean, you know, I've got this relatively new, so I want to say it's the favorite knife in my collection, but I feel like that's not completely fair because it's got that new feel to it. And so saying it's my favorite, I don't know if that's absolutely accurate or fair. But for being a knife that's my favorite, you would think I would have the most amount of Hinderers in my collection. That is not true at all. In fact, out of all 4 of these, I have the most Striders in my collection. And the reason for that is there's a difference between liking a knife and liking a brand's knives or liking their whole selection. And with Hinderers, you know, I like regular Hinderers fine enough. They're okay. I've got a couple. But it's really this particular setup that I absolutely love. And things similar to this. This is my aesthetic, right? I like this kind of, not necessarily beat up. You know, I don't necessarily love all of the nicks and stuff in here, but more like the color scheme of the acid washed blade. I don't really like shiny stone-washed blades too much. Satin blades, you know, sometimes I like them, sometimes I don't. Usually I like this kind of rougher type finish, but I really like this lock side with the 2 different tones of bronzing on there and the texture. I just really like the way this knife comes together. But 90% of Hinderers, I don't really feel that same way. 90% of Hinderers, I'm like, it's fine. A lot of them are just stonewash blade, stonewash lock side, some sort of bright G10, and it just doesn't really do anything for me. There's a few that I like. You know, I like the working finishes and things like that, and I do have a Bowie XM-18 in a similar color scheme than this. It doesn't have all the texturing and the beat up and stuff like that. It's kind of a cleaner version of this. I really like that one. But that kind of covers everything I love about Hinderer. I'll probably pick up an XM-18 Battlefield pickup at some point, but then that'll probably kind of cover everything for me. Every other finishes out there, kind of the battle black and all that stuff, I mean, they seem fine, but they just don't really do it for me like this one does. And it's kind of interesting how I can have a knife that's like one of my favorite knives in my collection, but not really have that much interest in getting more Hinderers, or at least not to a big degree. Same exact story for CRK. I really, really love this knife, but the rest of the knives they have out there just don't really do it for me. The Menandi, the small Sabenzas, it just doesn't speak to me. And then their special versions that they do, the different variants, usually they do like Cerakote stuff, Cerakote green. I'm not into the Cerakote thing. Just doesn't do anything for me. For the most part, the spread of different types of CRKs you can get just aren't that different. Like they really, for their stock catalog, you can really only get satin, polished satin, or stonewash blade. That's kind of all they do. And then the special editions, they'll do Cerakote black and things like that. But they don't really do this kind of stuff, right? And like I mentioned before, this is what I'm into. I like this kind of earthy, chemically, chalky, matte type finishes. And CRK doesn't really offer that. And they don't do a lot of textured handles. They did the crosshatch for a number of years. If you haven't checked out a crosshatch CRK, those things are cool, but unfortunately they're discontinued right now. Don't know if they're ever going to come back. But a similar story. Like this is one of my top 5 favorite knives, and yet I have limited interest in collecting more CRKs. And then with Demko, same thing. I really like this one. It's very, very cool. But at the same time, this is kind of, this is the quintessential Demko for me. And I'm good with it. One of the problems with Demkos, when you talk about the collecting side of Demkos, is they all kind of look the same. They've all got the same exact blade finish. They've all got the same exact textured or smooth titanium handles. So the only thing you're getting is a different blade shape. You can get the thinner version or the full thickness. And then whether you want a hole and a stud or just a hole, and that's it. I see people's collection videos of Demkos, and no knocking on them. Like, buy what you like, get what you like. But I'll see people do a spread of Demkos, and I'm like, they're awesome, but holy crap, they're all the same damn knife. It's like you copy and paste it all the way up. Like the blade shape is slightly different, and that's it. And for me with the Demko, I like the stud and the hole. So if I were to collect more Demkos, they would all have this same configuration anyways, more than likely. But I absolutely like this knife. Like, probably should have done an actual top 5 and maybe did my favorite OTF, which would be the Scarab 2 in the Apocalyptic finish. Is probably my favorite OTF in my collection. Not anything too crazy. Pretty, in fact, what's funny, before I get onto the Strider here, is I have a lot of wild knives in my collection. I used to have more. I actually sold a lot of them. And yet, I'm drawn to kind of the flashy, the weird, the interesting. And yet, when I have to sit down and pick out my favorite knives of my collection, they're not as crazy as you might think they would be. The ones that I truly, truly like are a little less crazy. Out of all these, I think the Battlefield pickup is the wildest one out of all of these here. And that includes my favorite OTF with that Scarab, the DES Scarab, specifically in the Apocalyptic finish. Not anything wild, not a special edition, not a custom, nothing like that. Just kind of a standard OTF. But when we get into Striders, for some reason, it kind of breaks the mold, right? This one appears in my top 5, just like the others. However, I really love collecting Striders, and I think the reason is that the things I like about Striders propagate through pretty much the whole line, for the most part. Unlike these other knives, where these are kind of like special edition one-offs, standard Striders just kind of do it for me. I like the finish options they have. I love the black oxide. I like the tiger stripe. I like the handle options, the G10, the simple G10. I also like the full tie with the flaming. Like just about everything that Strider does, I at least have an interest in and appreciate, and then some I absolutely love. And so my collection is extensively, I don't think I used that word right, heavy on Striders in there compared to some of these other knives. Even though, and I'm going to say this again, even though these all appear on my top 5, because of that reason, because I like the entire catalog of Striders. I also like how Striders have been around for a long time. So there's different iterations of when they existed. There's the pre-25. There's the really old ones, the first gens of the folders. There's even the pre-frame lock ones, the AR liner locks, the GB liner locks. There's a whole history of knives to kind of collect there. And Side note, okay, we're going to go on a little bit of a tangent, and this, I don't have an answer for this. I also find it interesting the way that certain knives are or are not collectible. So if you take, I don't know why I want to say SMF. This isn't an SMF, but if you were to take an SMF, which is closer in size to this 24 here, old SMFs are desirable, like pre-25 with the big pins. And of course, if you can get some of the early SMFs when they were numbered, highly collectible, highly sought after. You get big, super kudos if you have those in your collection. But a Gen 1, Gen 2 XM-24, nobody really cares. They're up for sale all the time where they don't have the lock bar insert, pre-tri-way, and they go for less than a gently used newer version. And this kind of goes back to that video I did about Striders and how Striders have chosen not to change their design. And I think that's part of the reason why they are more collectible in that fashion, because with things like Hinderers, where they have continuously improved their design and added new things in, creates a situation where people kind of want the latest and greatest, and they don't really want a pre-lock bar insert. They don't really want a pre-tri-way. They want the newest edition, the newest version, whereas Striders kind of kept it pure and maybe maintained that interest and collectability in old knives. I don't know for sure. That's just maybe part of a theory of part of why. I just find it interesting, especially since both of these came about roughly the same time, right? These were like comparable. People collected Hinderers, people collected Striders back in the day, and yet they've done vastly different things in terms of the community and the collectability, and the interest in the knives themselves are completely different. All right, so let me know down below. Do you have a similar thing where you have kind of a favorite knife or a top 3 favorite knives, and yet you don't really dig the brand as a whole that much and get into the whole brand? You just really like that knife, kind of like this CRK Inkosi here that I absolutely love, but I just can't really become a CRK fanboy. Oh, another reason too with the CRK, the brand just doesn't really speak to me. I'm a kid of the 80s. I watched Rambo and kind of those machismo military type cool things. So I always have a soft spot for kind of that badassness, is whatever, call it cheesy, call it cringy. I like it. And that's one of the reasons I like Hinderers. Hinderers, especially early. Hinderers have kind of changed now into like this whole ranch thing, right? Like, Hinderers used to be kind of tactical-ish, kind of like Striders when they first came out. That was the primary thing. A lot of his customs had more of a wicked, kind of aggressive design to them, and they were they came out of the same type ballpark. But Hinderers kind of softened on that a little bit. They're a little more like, hey, this is a high-quality knife you can use while you're out farming and ranching and camping and things like that. They've kind of separated themselves from that, whereas Strider is not really wavered in that. But like CRKs, it just, the knives are awesome, but the company itself, there's just no meat there for me to like say, yeah, I'm a CRK guy, because what is their gist? What is their vibe? It's just well-made pocket knives for general use. Anyways, I've talked way too long. Comment down below if any of this connects to kind of your collecting, whether these are what you're into or not. Do you have a similar type thing where maybe there's a Wii knife that you just really, really like, but the Wii knives as a whole doesn't really grab your attention, and you don't really collect a bunch of them, but there's a few of them that are really, really that you really, really like. And I think that would actually apply more to those kind of brands, because a lot of those brands have very varying degrees of designs and things, right? They don't really have a holistic design language per se. They kind of just do a bunch of different designs trying to get people's attention. All right, guys, I'm out. Please comment. Thank you for watching. Couldn't do this without you. Wouldn't want to anyways. Take care.